This episode of Hellbent for Horror is brought to you by Patreon supporters and listeners like you. If you enjoy Hellbent for Horror, please consider supporting the show by contributing either on our Patreon site or via PayPal. You can find links to both of those on hellbentforhorror.com. And I thank you for helping to sustain the show. Hi, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror. I'm S.A. Bradley, and I'm a lifelong movie lover, but my heart belongs to horror. My biggest thrill, however, is getting to talk to people about this stuff. I really want to start conversations with you. Before I start the show, I want to thank Derek and all the folks over on the Astro Radio Z podcast. I was honored to be asked to talk about John Waters' A Dirty Shame. If you're not listening to Astro Radio Z, you need to rectify that. And I'll be covering the Etheria Film Night on June 3rd at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. Etheria Film Night is the world's most respected showcase of new horror, comedy, science fiction, fantasy, action, and thriller films made by emerging women directors. If you're in LA, come see the movies, support the artists, and stop by and say hi to me. Now, if you're in Northern California, I'll be attending Sinister Creature Con in Stockton on June 10th and 11th. If you listen to the show, you know I love American Mary, and they're having an American Mary reunion with the Soska sisters, Catherine Isabel, and Tristan Risk. If you want tickets, you can find a link on the Hellbent for Horror website, and if you do go and you see me, say hi, get some swag. I also want to thank listeners Isaac Thorne and John Arminio for joining the Horror Horde by supporting the show through Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to my website and click the support button. And if you follow me on Twitter, there's a link to the Patreon site on every episode post I do. And we give you stuff for your support, including your own personal direct play link for the episodes. And if you're a listener who enjoys the show, I do have a favor to ask. Libsyn, the podcast host for Hellbent for Horror, is trying to get demographic information to help my show find the right third-party sponsor. Hooray! If you could, please go to survey.libsyn.com/Hellbent for Horror, all one word, and fill out the short survey. You'll find it pretty easily. I'll also have a link to the survey on the Hellbent for Horror webpage, which is hellbentforhorror.com. It's a simple way to help out the show, and I thank you in advance. And now, on with the show. As you know, I love talking to people about movies, and I'll do it for hours. But I found that this does bring up an unexpected social anxiety for me. It's a dread that, sooner or later, someone is going to ask me what my favorite horror film is. I know, right? It's only the single most obvious question someone might ask me. Now, it's not because I don't have a favorite horror movie. It's because if I'm asked, I just go blank. Call it an occupational hazard. If I'm a horror movie lover, I'm a polyamorist. I can tell you that I love Phantasm, and I've made a pilgrimage to the mansion used in the movie. But I also made a pilgrimage to the Point Reyes Lighthouse from John Carpenter's The Fog. How do I pick between Phantasm and The Fog and Alien and Psycho and Night of the Living Dead and Halloween and The Thing and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just to name a few? It's like a supernatural Sophie's Choice. But I am aware that all of those films have one thing in common. They're all old, like 30 years plus old. The movies and music that you discover and fall in love with when you're a teenager will be the ones that stick with you forever. They are formative in defining your taste and style moving forward. Of course, I've never stopped watching horror movies or falling in love with them. But I don't talk about the new ones as much as I do the old ones, and that's a problem. So I'm going to rectify that here. I've decided to make a list of horror movies made within the last 4 years that I think are worth watching. And I ended up with a list of about 40 movies. I'll bet that's more than you thought, right? Same here, which is why this is going to be a 2-part episode. What this means is that there are very good horror movies out there that don't get recognized or promoted. Some of them only get released to streaming services, and they get buried under hundreds of lesser titles. Now, let me give a little clarification on my list. First, these movies cover the years 2013 to 2017, and they only cover the movies I've watched, so I may miss some. Let me know. Send me an email. Secondly, these movies aren't in any order of preference, although some movies might be grouped together because of their themes or because of their subject matter. And lastly, these movies make my list because they either surprised me or were imaginative or gave me a scare. Some may not be to your liking, but they each have a unique voice that made them stand out, warts and all, from all of the others. One last thing, most of the movies are available through either Netflix or Amazon streaming services. I want to start with one that you most likely already know about. The movie is 2017's Get Out, written and directed by Jordan Peele. I'm surprised at how many horror fans I meet that haven't seen it yet. I think that some horror fans are slow to watch this film because it has been so absurdly embraced by the mainstream critics. I must say, I got grumpy when I read a review that said, "Horror films finally get smart." It's your typical backhanded compliment, and it feels disingenuous. And horror fans have been jerked around this way before. Every few years, critics overhype a movie that's decent but not great. But Get Out is an excellent, excellent horror film that I hope doesn't get missed because of the overhype and the praise of the fickle public. Get Out follows Chris and Rose, an interracial couple that go for a weekend visit to meet Rose's wealthy parents. Chris is nervous. He's not only going into the unfamiliar countryside, but he's concerned he'll be the only African American there. Rose, of course, assures him that her family is very progressive and he will be welcomed. Rose is right about her family. Dad is a neurosurgeon and he is overly warm and cloyingly interested in Chris. Mom is a hypnotherapist and is friendly, but she's a little clinically cold. Chris, however, is correct as well. He is in a sea of white faces in this small elite community. The only African Americans seem to be the groundskeeper and maid on the parents' estate. He tries to connect with them as friendly faces with familiar common ground. But these two people are weirdly stiff and uncomfortable around him. Their politeness is obviously artificial, and they speak in outdated vernacular, and he notices that they are constantly watching him. Now, everyone of a certain age is going to yell out, "Stepford Wives!" And yes, the central inspiration for Get Out is Stepford Wives. This movie uses your knowledge of that trope to tell a very unsettling story about personal identity theft. It uses our own anxiety about button-pushing topics like race to fuel an allegory about American history and culture, and like the best horror movies, it wants to upset a few apple carts. But Get Out is excellent because it also explores loss and self-hatred and paranoia and the invisible prisons we build for ourselves that allow others to easily trap us. And this movie is more perverse in its horror than you'd think. Jordan Peele is obviously a fan of horror movies, and he takes it seriously. He shoots the movie with wide shots and long takes instead of the close-ups and lots of different camera angles you usually see in a horror movie. And that makes every conversation, no matter how innocent it may be, feel like an interrogation or the confession of a crime. I highly recommend Get Out. Another horror film that got good reviews from mainstream critics but got ignored by horror fans is Don't Breathe from 2016. The movie starts with an aerial shot of a quiet neighborhood street at dawn. It looks idyllic from up high, but as we get closer, we see that the houses are abandoned, and there's a man dragging a body down the middle of the street. Despite that opening, Don't Breathe starts as a traditional home invasion thriller. What's different is that our main characters are the invaders, not those being invaded. It's set in the abandoned neighborhoods of Detroit. It's a ghost town waiting for a ghost story. We meet Rocky, a desperate woman who robs the remaining occupied homes with her boyfriend, who's known only as Money, and his partner. Money gets a tip that there's a house in a deserted neighborhood where the occupant has $300,000 stashed away somewhere inside. The guy's a war veteran who lives alone ever since his daughter died in a car accident. They stake out the house, and they see the man walking his very dangerous-looking Rottweiler, and they realize something. They realize that he is blind. This bothers Rocky, but Money says just because he's blind doesn't mean he's a saint. Money has no clue how correct his assessment is. This movie may start as a home invasion thriller, but once the three crooks break in, the movie grows as dark as a blind man's house. It's not giving anything away to say that our victim is not as helpless as originally thought. But you need to watch to see just how dangerous and unhinged he really is. This is a hell house where every noise is a threat, and every new room they enter is a trap. As Rocky flees deeper into the house, you can feel hope fading away. And what's waiting for Rocky in the depths of this house might be a fate worse than death. For a simple story told well, with plenty of grotesque surprises, give Don't Breathe a look. The next movie would make a great double feature with Don't Breathe. That is, if visions of nihilistic emptiness give you a good night's sleep. The movie is 2015's Green Room. We follow a road-weary punk band as they travel by van to a secluded part of the gloomy, rainy Pacific Northwest. They are broke, and they are on the precipice of obscurity, the kind of band that could disappear and nobody would notice. They get to their gig to find out they've been booked into a neo-Nazi skinhead bar, and from the very beginning there is a genuine sense of menace from the crowd, a quiet danger with hostility barely hidden behind unblinking stares. Although the clientele makes them uneasy, they refuse to be intimidated and they play the gig. In the end, the band is ready to leave, but one of the members forgets her cell phone in the green room. One of the band members goes back to the room to get it and walks into a murder scene. There's a woman on the floor with a knife in her head, another woman terrified, and a skinhead ready to kill again. We are dropped into the middle of this situation without any explanation. We are just there. And in a flash of panic and violence, the band locks themselves inside the green room with one giant skinhead they need to keep alive as a hostage. He's the only thing keeping the others from breaking down the door and executing them all. The leader of the skinheads is summoned, and he quietly and soberly tells the band that there is no hope, no escape, and no quarter will be given. And we slowly realize that the band didn't just stumble upon a murder. They've stumbled upon a secret that every person in that club will die to keep hidden. This setup shrinks the world into a tightly coiled spring waiting to snap. This is an endless night, full of dark shadows and corners and cracking bones. Characters die suddenly and brutally in the blink of an eye. And the skinheads are quiet and calculating like wolves. And that makes them, and the movie, feel real. The movie is ruthless and pitiless and smart and witty, and it keeps you off balance. At the end of this film, I thought of the tagline on the poster for the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The tagline was, "Who will survive and what will be left of them?" That's the question you will ask again and again while you watch Green Room. We've talked about human monsters. Now let's delve into the nightmare stuff. It's probably obvious that I love movies that isolate characters in single locations. When the movie is good, those limitations bring out the imagination and the focus of the filmmakers. It's a very all-or-nothing thing. It either works or it doesn't. And that brings me to 2015's We Are Still Here, a ghost story with a Lovecraftian twist that does it right. It pays homage to films like The Legend of Hell House and The Changeling, but it has a mean streak and a very surreal take on ghosts. The story follows Anne and Paul Sacchetti, a middle-aged couple who move to an old house in a small New England town after their son dies in a car accident. The house has a history, and there are spirits in the house, and the small town has its dark secrets. It's a standard setup, right? Well, not so fast. What's so good about We Are Still Here is that it's quite aware you've seen a few ghost stories in your life, and it faithfully tells its ghost story with care and style and doesn't forget to be scary. But that ghost story is there to give you a false sense of comfort. You think you know what the story is. Trust me, you don't know what's going to happen. And that's all I'm going to say, because We Are Still Here earns your surprise. So to talk more about it would be to ruin it for you. What I can say is that the movie is effectively creepy and the surprises are effectively twisted. It's a triumph of low-budget filmmaking, where the timing and power suggestion create a slow burn until the final act, which is absolutely insane. I highly recommend We Are Still Here. And that brings me to another ghost story that is so much more than a ghost story. 2016's The Autopsy of Jane Doe. And it is one of the best ghost stories I have ever seen, hands down. The movie starts with a homicide crime scene investigation. There are multiple brutally murdered bodies in a locked house, but there is no forced entry. In fact, there are signs that indicate that the victims were trying to get out of the house. And then, in the basement, they find something even more bizarre. There is a hole dug in the dirt, and in the hole is a dead, naked woman. She is either half dug out or half buried. We can't tell, and she doesn't seem to have a mark on her. The image of this naked woman in the hole is so painterly. It's beautiful. It's like a Goya. And it's one of the first of many visuals that are truly horrible beautiful. The sheriff takes the body to the local mortician for an urgent all-night autopsy. Mortician Tommy Tilden performs the autopsy, and his son Austin assists him. And Tommy looks at a corpse like a mystery to solve. The body is the key, the Rosetta Stone, and it always reveals its secrets. But this body, this Jane Doe, is not revealing anything at first. There are no outward signs of any trauma at all. The body is fresh, pristine, beautiful, except for the eyes. The eyes are cloudy, as if she's been dead for several days. And then Tommy finds that the wrist and ankle bones are shattered, but the skin is unmarked. The physical puzzle isn't making sense. We learn some disturbing facts about dead bodies and the art of the autopsy and the business of storing the dead. And you just know these facts are going to come back to haunt us. There's a major rainstorm outside, and it seems to be affecting the lights and the radio. And it's about at that time when Tommy takes a scalpel and he makes the first incision. And that's as far as I'm going to go. Get used to it. There's going to be a pattern here. The chills and, dare I say it, the joys of The Autopsy of Jane Doe come from the element of surprise. Most of this movie takes place in one location with two characters and one corpse, and it will keep you riveted to the screen. This movie drips with atmosphere and intelligence, and it's focused and mean and lean. And even though a movie with autopsy in the title will have gore in it, the movie shows a lot of restraint. It uses shadows and sound effects like the movies of Val Lewton did. And the end of this movie has a twist so cruel and so amazing and so clever, it will stun you. I actually cheered when I saw it. I give The Autopsy of Jane Doe my highest recommendation. One of my favorite films of all time is Phantasm, a surreal horror film that deals with death and loss through dreams within dreams and time shifts in the narrative. Good surreal horror films are rare because there's a fine line between surreal and incoherent. Just like nightmares, surreal horror films are meant to disorient you and to disturb you. They are expressionistic, more about feel than they are story logic, and that isn't everybody's cup of tea. However, if it is your cup of tea, like it is mine, the next two films are good examples. I appreciate them for being risk takers. Hell is not a place you go to. You carry hell with you at all times. You carry it inside you. That quote comes from the 2015 film Baskin, a Turkish horror film that is not for the squeamish or those that need a linear plot. We are in Eraserhead territory in the plot department, so be forewarned. But Within its own lucid dream logic, Baskin weaves a powerful spell. You feel that you are being dragged into a nightmare you cannot wake from. Baskin translates to raid, and a group of Turkish police officers are dispatched as backup to a police incident in a remote town a couple miles away. This movie was made during actual riots in Turkey over police brutality, and these officers are bullies with a badge who take what they want with fear and intimidation. The town they are heading to has a bad reputation, and the police are on edge. But before they can get there, a naked man runs into the road and the patrol van hits him. When they get out to investigate, there is no body, but there is a huge mass of squirming frogs on the side of the road, and someone has carved strange symbols into the van. After many surreal and creepy encounters, the police finally get to their destination. It's an old defunct police station and jail, and there is nobody in sight. There is a police car outside with its door open and its lights still flashing, but there's nobody and no sounds. But it is when the officers enter the abandoned police station that Baskin goes into full, grotesque nightmare mode. What the police encounter when they go inside is an experience that you might find hard to shake or forget. The movie contains some of the most hellish images I've seen in recent memory. Baskin is a movie that lingers in your head after it ends, just like a particularly bad dream. I usually don't like found footage films, so imagine my surprise when I put not one, but 2 found footage movies on my list. The one I want to talk about now is a real red-headed stepchild, but I stand behind my support. It's found footage and it's a surreal horror film, and that is one fucked up combination. It never stood a chance with most critics or most horror fans. But I found the 2014 film As Above, So Below to be a creepy and experimental horror film that I applaud for daring to try something unusual. The story follows Scarlett Marlowe, a young scholar who studies alchemy. She's searching for the Philosopher's Stone, which, legends say, can turn base metals into gold. Oh, and give eternal life. During an excursion to Iraq, Scarlett finds a statue covered in Aramaic text that gives clues to the location of the stone. After a few more puzzle pieces are discovered, Scarlett decodes coordinates that show the location of the Philosopher's Stone. It's 370 feet beneath the streets of Paris, somewhere deep within the 200 miles of tunnels that make up the catacombs of Paris, surrounded by the remains of 6 million corpses. Scarlett recruits one of her friends and some urban explorers and a documentarian to sneak into the forbidden and unexplored areas of the catacombs. We get treated to some footage in the actual catacombs, and that sets the right tone. Scarlett and her team split off from the safe paths within the catacombs. They find the mouth of a tunnel buried under a pile of human bones. They need to crawl through a sea of human remains to enter this new realm. And as they venture further into the pitch-black tunnel, as they descend deeper down into the bowels of the earth, they swear they hear voices. The movie kicks into surreal overdrive in the chambers and tunnels they find. In this world, under our world, gravity bends, sound bends, time bends, reality bends. It's rare to see a movie go so far into head trip mode and not apologize for it. If you like horror movies that want to blow your mind as well as scare you, try As Above, So Below. The second found footage film that I really liked is 2014's Creep. I can't say enough good things about Creep. Aaron is a videographer who responds to a Craigslist ad for a one-day gig at a home in the mountains. The house is the kind of tastefully low-key, hidden mansion in the hills the rich normally own. He meets Joseph, who has hired him to record various messages for his unborn son. See, Joseph has rapidly spreading brain cancer. Early on, it's obvious that Joseph is a little weird. He smiles too much, he's a big hugger, and he seems to get attached to people rather easily. Oh, and he likes to play practical jokes to scare people. What's so great about Creep is that it lives right on the line between comedy and horror. The story and situations grow out of the interactions between these two guys. One guy is being paid to be a professional, so he's used to being polite to eccentrics. The other is a rich guy who is oblivious to other people's boundaries. So there's a nervous humor built right into that situation. But all it takes is one step to cross over the line from comedy into horror. All it takes is one of the characters to cross over that line. This is smart low-budget filmmaking at its best. It's just two guys, one camera, all alone in a house in the woods. Alone except for Peach Fuzz. Who or what is Peach Fuzz? You'll just have to watch Creep to find out. When we fall in love, we are vulnerable. We allow ourselves to risk personal suffering on the faith that it will all work out. And we live in horror when it doesn't. It's the horror of realizing that you don't know your partner that drives 2014's Honeymoon. The movie opens with a wedding video of newlyweds Bee and Paul. It's full of romantic memories of how they met. The newlyweds are honeymooning at Bee's family cabin off a lake that's surrounded by a forest. Bee spent her summers there as a kid, and she wants to share the memories with Paul. And then, one night, Paul wakes up to find that Bee is not in the bed, so he calls out to her. Nothing. He searches the cabin, and Bee is gone, and the back door is open. He runs into the woods in a panic, and he finds Bee, naked and disoriented. When he takes her home, she tells him it's just stress-related sleepwalking. He's terrified. She's never sleepwalked before, but she assures him that she's okay. The next morning, she wakes up early to fix him a breakfast of French toast and coffee. Except she forgot to batter the bread, and it's burning. Bee insists she's okay. She's just feeling a little funny. And then Paul goes to pour coffee and finds unground beans floating in hot water. And that is the beginning of a terrifying journey into personal dread that gets more and more frightening and tragic as it goes along. Bee starts to forget the meaning of words, and she is missing memories. Is there something physically wrong with Bee? What is out there in the woods that terrifies her when the night comes? Watch Honeymoon, a horror movie so well constructed and so well acted, you'll want to watch it a second time just to catch the clues you missed. The next movie is about a budding romance, the first sparks of falling in love. Honeymoon found horror in a relationship falling apart. However, the movie Spring from 2015 says the real horror is if the relationship actually works. We meet Evan, a young man whose life is a total train wreck. His mother just died of cancer, and he just lost his job, and he just got into a fight that might lead to jail time. So, Evan flees to a beautiful seaside town in Italy with no plans, just hoping to change his life. And that's when he meets Louise, a beautiful local woman. She is mysterious and aloof and flirtatious, and Evan is smitten. So he takes a job at a local farm to stay in Italy illegally so he can pursue her. If this movie sounds like a romance, it is, except there are some complications. Evan comes with some baggage, but it is nothing compared to the baggage Louise has, because the baggage Louise comes with might be full of body parts. Louise is keeping secrets from Evan, things about her past that could put him in jeopardy. Evan knows there's something she's not telling him, but he can't let her go. He suddenly realizes he will risk everything to be with her. I know, I'm being vague, and there's a reason, because Spring is a real rarity, a horror movie that dares to cover a wide array of emotions, honestly and realistically, without losing sight of the horror elements. And it is a gorgeous movie full of color and life and contrasts, and it photographs a violent death as beautifully as it does the Italian countryside. Because love can be equally horrible and beautiful, especially in this movie. Spring is a wildly original and ambitious horror film that dares you to use your head and your heart. Highly recommended. I also recommend 2014's When Animals Dream, a Danish horror film that can be seen as a cross between Let the Right One In and Ginger Snaps. Like Ginger Snaps, it's a horror movie about the changes of a girl's body at puberty, but it is a darker dive into the family dynamics. This lycanthropy isn't from a bite, it's hereditary. So this movie also adds guilt and grief and resentment to the emotional stew. It unflinchingly shows how cruel a teenage girl can get, seemingly overnight, when the chemicals tell her that family is irrelevant. And, like Let the Right One In, there's a tragic love story that is built upon loneliness, isolation, and a deep need to be understood. There is a ruthlessness to the main character in how she deals with people, and how she craves sex, and how effortlessly she rips people apart, literally. When Animals Dream is a hidden gem. The next movie starts with a young man and a woman being chased out of a house at night by two men armed with a shotgun. The woman gets the brunt of the shotgun blast, but the man is wounded and he runs into the nearby woods. And then the two armed men calmly walk over to the woman lying on the ground. They pour gasoline on her and light a match. And that's just the first 60 seconds of 2017's The Void, a gonzo, blood-splattered, head-trip, killer cult, killer monster movie. This ultra-low-budget movie is a throwback to 1980s horror, including using practical effects over CGI. Now, The Void might pay homage to many of those 1980s films, but it is its own beast, and it delivers the goods. The plot kicks in when a sheriff's deputy finds the wounded man on the road and rushes him to a nearby hospital. Things get worse and weirder when they get inside the hospital. A gathering of hooded cultists has encircled the hospital. Now, a small group of patients, nurses, and doctors, as well as the deputy, are trapped inside. The cultists stand like sentinels, and they only attack when someone tries to leave. And that's all within the first 10 minutes. Why are they being forced to stay inside the hospital? The group soon discovers that there's something else inside the hospital with them. And at about the 20-minute mark, some of the nurses and patients start to go insane. And worse, some of them start to change. And at about the 30-minute mark, what's happening inside the hospital starts to affect the world outside. And that is, quite literally, not the half of what is going on in The Void. This movie proudly disregards budgetary limits as a reason to scale down their ambition. There are more ideas floating through The Void than most big-budget horror films ever try. And they achieve so much through old-school practical effects and using forced perspectives and shots and bizarre lighting. But what most impressed me was the dark, doomsday atmosphere that the film has. There is a grit and an immediacy, a true grasp of horror that catches your breath. If you want a movie that defiantly commits 100% to being a horror movie, watch The Void. The next movie, 2014's Last Shift, would make a good double feature with The Void. Instead of a hospital, Last Shift features a police station. And in both movies, something inhuman lurks the halls. But where The Void is gonzo, Last Shift is a slow burn. And both are excellent. In Last Shift, a female rookie's first night on the job finds her assigned to the desk of a police station that is permanently closing in the morning. Her only responsibilities are to let the cleanup crew in when they show, and to not leave the building. The desk sergeant informs her that all the 911 calls are rerouted to the new station. It will be a quiet night. And then he leaves her alone in the building. And then she starts getting 911 emergency calls. Unfortunately, they're coming from people who have already been murdered. And they were all murdered by a sinister cult. A sinister cult whose leader was killed in the holding cell of the very station she's guarding. And right about then, the officer realizes she's not alone in the station anymore. And you'll have to watch the movie to find out what's in there with her. Last Shift is a tense, slow burn horror movie about the ambiguity of good and evil. So that's a lot of movie watching, and there's still a lot more movies to talk about. Because I do believe there's a horror resurgence happening, and it is happening under the radar in small independent films, like it always does. There will always be the odd movie that breaks into the mainstream, but that's always temporary. The new classics are going to be picked by us through word of mouth. I hope I made your Netflix queue a little bigger with this episode. I'll be coming back with more movies from my list on an upcoming episode. But before I close, let me leave you with one more movie. It's a perfect example of stumbling upon gold in them there Netflix and Amazon hills. I had never heard of this movie. It had a big-name star and several dependable character actors in it. When I looked the movie up, I found it had played the film festival route and premiered at Fantastic Film Fest. It had a very limited theatrical run after it got picked up by a small independent distributor. With this big-name actor, this must really suck. And yet, the name of the movie intrigued me. What the hell, it's streaming, it ain't gonna cost me nothing. And after I watched it, I called people to tell them they had to watch this movie. Just shut up and watch the movie. And I'm going to tell you what I told my friends on the phone, and nothing more. There's a movie you gotta see. It stars Kurt Russell and an ensemble cast. It's a horror movie in the Old West. The name of the movie is Bone Tomahawk from 2015. There are cannibals. Just shut up and watch the movie. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Hellbent for Horror, and my Twitter handle is Hellbent Horror. You can find Hellbent for Horror on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, and other podcast platforms. And H4H has its own app. You can download it from the Google or Amazon store for Android, and the iPhone version is available on the iTunes store. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay hellbent.